I'd like to welcome everybody to today's presentation on boundaries and the PIECES method. I'm your host, Dr. Dawn-Elise Snipes. Today, we're going to define what boundaries are, describe 5 types of boundaries and their impact on health, discuss 4 laws of boundaries, 3 types of boundary violators, recognize that boundary setting helps us stay safe, and explore what I call the boundary workout to strengthen weak boundaries. Boundaries teach people the types of behavior that you will and will not tolerate. When I set a boundary and I say, okay, I'm thinking about like with my children when they were growing up, I would set a boundary with backtalk, for example. They can assert their opinion, but I have a boundary in how they do it and what types of behaviors I will tolerate. Boundaries are like a door into your safe space. So I want you to think of boundaries kind of like your house. And you have doors, you have windows, you can let people in, and you can also lock people out. You can't choose who knocks on your windows or your doors, who wants to come in, but you can choose who you let in. And that's really important. A lot of people that we work with grew up in chaotic environments in which their boundaries were not respected, and they were told how to think. They were told how to feel. They were told what they needed to do and when. They may have had their opinions or their thoughts or their abilities criticized, and that can feel very invasive. That can feel very disempowering. In response, people often go one of 3 ways. They just kind of give up and they're like, nobody's going to respect my boundaries. It's not safe to assert them. So, bring it on. They can throw up walls. So they don't let anybody in. Their boundaries are extremely rigid, extremely tall. Or they're somewhere in the middle where they have strong boundaries, maybe overly strong boundaries most of the time. They don't want to get hurt. They want to protect themselves. But then when they start feeling scared, when they start feeling terrified, they may just abandon all boundaries and go, okay, screw it, whatever it takes in order for you to support me. And I want you to think about how that developed. In what ways were those behaviors rewarded or punished? In what ways were people's attempts to set and maintain boundaries discouraged or ignored? How might they have learned to set overly rigid boundaries? Obviously, some of this may come from direct learning from their family of origin. Maybe their caregivers had overly weak or overly rigid or boundaries that were on roller skates. We don't know. We do know that people learn to set boundaries and learn what appropriate or safe boundaries are from prior relationships. And when I say safe, I don't necessarily mean healthy boundaries. What I mean is it is safe for me to set this boundary and I won't get hurt. I won't be abandoned. And a dysfunctional environment often teaches dysfunctional boundaries. People with weak boundaries often needed nurturance and had to accept violations. A child, for example, may have not had a healthy environment, and their caregivers were constantly telling them what to think, what to feel, what to do. And they didn't want to do it, but in order to avoid the wrath of the parent or abandonment by the parent, the child had to give in. They were unsafe setting boundaries. And boundaries, setting them is a skill and kind of an art. It's not something that most of us know how to do from jump. And if they didn't have a secure attachment to teach them how to healthfully set boundaries and teach them that, it's okay to set boundaries and say, no, I don't like that, or no, I don't want that, and you're still lovable. If they didn't have that, they may not know how to set those boundaries. People with rigid boundaries often have been hurt and are trying to stay safe. I'm going to put my boundaries up. This is my thought. This is what I'm thinking. Nobody can change my mind. This is how I feel. Like it or lump it, my way or the highway. In what ways can that sort of rigid interpersonal behavior help someone stay safe? Help someone prevent getting hurt? And I want you to consider the fact that for some people, they may justify or rationalize, it's my way or the highway. And if they choose the highway, it's not me, it's them. Could be a learned behavior from modeling from their caregivers. Could be a way they learned how to survive. Either way, it is healthy to have strong boundaries with some people and to be a little bit more open in your boundaries with others. And we're going to talk about that. But what we're really looking at here is people who most of the time with most people have exceptionally weak boundaries or exceptionally rigid boundaries. And then those boundaries on roller skates that I talked about. They may develop in a person who wants to stay safe but splits people or dysregulates. When I love you, when I feel safe around you, I am going to have more open boundaries. As soon as I start fearing you or fearing abandonment, those walls just jump right up and there is no middle ground. I'm either wide open or I'm shut down. And they may seem to exist in people who don't know how to communicate their needs. What I mean by that is it can appear that someone is changing their boundaries. They're open one day and they're resistant or walled off another day. However, it could be that the person with whom they're having boundary issues with has done something in the intervening time to make them feel unsafe. And instead of communicating their needs, saying, well, when you did this in the meeting last week, I felt embarrassed and humiliated. And right now, I don't feel safe sharing things with you. Well, okay. So it's very obvious now, if you express that, why the person went from having open boundaries to being more shut down. Let's talk about those different types of boundaries, because a lot of times we only think about emotional or physical boundaries, but there are 5 different types. Physical boundaries. This is your personal space. Culturally, personal space differs, and it's important to communicate with people if they're from a culture that tends to stand closer. If that makes you uncomfortable, communicating to them that I'm not rejecting you. Culturally, we tend to stand a little further apart. Or maybe it's not cultural. Maybe it's a trauma reaction. I don't feel comfortable standing that close to people. I know there were a couple of times when we were in DC, we went on the train. I can't even think of what it's called right now. The metro. And we were packed in like sardines. And I do not like being that close to strangers. I feel very uncomfortable. I feel very uneasy. Now, of course, I'm not going to look at everybody on the train and go, all right, y'all back up. I need some personal space. But I felt stressed. I recognized that inadvertently my boundaries were being violated. And that was probably true for a lot of people on the metro, but we didn't have any choice. Helping people recognize their physical boundaries. And eye contact falls in there. And I know eye contact is not physical touch, but it can feel like somebody's boring into your soul if they are just staring at you. This is also another cultural issue. Some cultures believe that it is inappropriate and disrespectful to make extended eye contact with someone, especially someone who is considered of a higher rank or more authoritative. We do want to be sensitive to that and not assume that because someone is not making eye contact with us, that they are being disrespectful. People who are on the autism spectrum may have more difficulty with eye contact. Assuming is always bad. Mind reading, thinking that you know what a person's thinking and why they're doing it, is not helpful. One of the things we can do in helping people establish boundaries is also help them establish communication, assertive communication, and learn to ask questions, but also assert their preferences. Interpersonal boundaries include who you choose to spend time with, the pace of relationships. Some people get into a relationship and 2 weeks later they want to be moving in together. And the other person may be like, whoa, let's pump the brakes on that for a second. The pace of the relationship. And this is true for friendships. This is true for therapeutic relationships. When I meet somebody for the first time, I don't expect by the second session they're going to have all their walls down and be willing to tell me anything and everything that has ever happened to them. I don't expect that. I let them set the pace of the relationship as we develop trust. And some people also consider interpersonal boundaries sharing friends. And this is not in professional relationships, but in personal relationships. If I make a friend with my neighbor, for example, I want to get to know her, but I may not be ready to introduce her to all my friends yet until I figure out, is this a good fit? Will they mesh with each other, or are they going to be like oil and water? So interpersonal boundaries have a lot of different dimensions. Emotional and cognitive boundaries, we're going to cover those together. How I feel and what I think. That's mine. And there's a separation between what I think and feel and what you think and feel. And I have the choice to adopt or embrace your feelings or thoughts, but I don't have to. And when we tell somebody that they need to change their mind, when we tell somebody how they should feel, that's violating their boundaries. Boundaries go both ways. If we want people to respect how we think and feel, we need to respect how they think and feel. We can disagree. We can say, I don't see it that way. But we can't tell them to change. We can tell them our perspective if it's appropriate. We can validate how somebody feels without violating anybody's boundaries. My kids, when they were little, for example, they would get upset about something. And I wouldn't see it as any big deal. But, I'm 30 some odd years older than they are. Of course, I've got more life experiences and I may not see it as a big deal. However, me telling them, when you get older, you'll look back and think that this isn't a big thing. That's invalidating. That's violating their boundaries. It's saying, you really shouldn't feel that way. That's not helpful. It's actually intrusive. Instead, I may say, I can see that you're really angry about this. I can see that you're really upset about this right now. Let's talk about it. Help me understand what about this situation is contributing to how you feel about it. And we can talk about it. I'm validating how they feel, how they are experiencing the world through their lens, through their perspective, through their worldview, whatever phrase you want to use. And then environmental boundaries, that's your stuff. Your diary, your clothes, your pets, whatever. It's your stuff. It's not your physical space, like your personal feelings of safety, but it's your stuff. And you don't want people going into your room and borrowing your clothes without asking, or reading your diary, or opening your email and going through it. That's a violation of your boundaries. And we can see how those boundaries happen. I remember when I was working in one of the places I worked, I came in one day to find that one of my employees had let themselves in to my office and gone through the stuff that was on my desk, which at that time I was doing annual evaluations. I felt betrayed. I felt violated. I felt very angry because then they went on and spread all kinds of heads up to everybody else, which I hadn't even finished writing the stuff, whatever. But my environmental boundaries were very violated. You can have, and you probably will have, different levels of boundaries in each area with every different person. My neighbor, for example, I love her to death. However, I don't know her well enough or feel safe enough sharing how I feel about things and, what my thoughts are on everything between here and next Sunday. I will share some things. I'll share, we make small talk about the weather, about the feral cats in the neighborhood that we're trying to trap, about, general family stuff. But we don't go into deep detail on anything yet. And we may at some point. But would I give her a key to feed my cats and water my plants? Sure. I trust her in my environment. I trust her to be around me physically. It's cognitively and emotionally, we haven't developed that trust yet. Healthy boundaries help us feel safe, supported, and self. And I don't know what other word to use there. Helps us recognize who we are, separate from everybody else. These are my thoughts, my feelings, my needs, my preferences. When we feel safe, we downregulate. We're not as anxious. We don't feel as vulnerable. So we have more wise mind capability. We have the ability to downregulate and relax enough to get better sleep. We don't have as much muscle tension, less pain, improved immunity, reduced inflammation, and improved insulin sensitivity. When we are constantly stressed, when we're feeling constantly unsafe, our body is constantly dumping blood sugar, which tends to make us somewhat insulin resistant. As we feel safer, we're not constantly bombarding those receptors with insulin. Interpersonally, our energy and desire to identify healthy relationships and nurture and maintain them increases, including our relationship with ourselves. As we start feeling safe around other people, as we start feeling like, hey, I can hang out with this person. I don't have to agree with them on everything. And I will be safe. That's a huge step, and it's a big issue for a lot of people right now. There's a whole lot of social anxiety out there. Emotionally, when we're more relaxed, we're getting better sleep, we're not afraid of being around other people, we actually have a desire to develop secure attachments. We start to feel happier, less angry, less anxious, less hopeless and helpless or depressed, and maybe even less guilt-ridden. Now, why do I bring guilt here? Guilt is anger at ourselves, and we need to remember, and this is one of those semantic, nuanced things, but our relationship with ourself is informed, if you will, by the people that we let live in our head, and those tapes that we play over and over again that tell us we should feel guilty, we should feel bad. And it's important that we set boundaries with anybody who's occupying our headspace. Cognitively, if we're not stressed or as stressed, we're able to think more clearly. Our prefrontal cortex is getting more blood sugar, and our perceptions may change as we start to feel safer. When we are in fight or flight, a little bit or a lot, doesn't matter. When we're in fight or flight, it shades or puts a lens of threat over everything, and it makes us more vigilant to the threats that are in our environment, and less aware of the strengths, the resources, and the positive things. As we start to relax and feel safer, we start to notice the strengths, the resources, and the positive things more so. And it's kind of interesting how our brain does that. But we notice things that are in line with if you want to think of it this way, our emotional state at the moment. If we're angry or anxious, we're going to notice the threats. If we're happy, we're going to notice the bunny rabbits and the sunrises. Environmentally, we tend to feel safer when we know that the people that we do let in, the people that we do give access to our space, are not going to abuse it, abandon it, violate it. So let's talk about the 4 laws of boundaries. Number 1, boundaries need periodic evaluation. Boundaries change, like I mentioned with my neighbor. We went from not knowing each other, from Adam's house cat, to becoming acquaintances. I wouldn't say we're to the place of friends yet, not because I don't like her, I don't trust her, I think she's great, but we just haven't gotten there. In our neighborhood, we all live on 5 to 8 acres worth of land, and we've got our stuff to do. We're not in a neighborhood that gets together and does a lot of stuff. But anyway, boundaries need periodic evaluation. Sometimes you might recognize, and I recently recognized that, hey, there's this person over here that I don't know very well, or I kind of trust, but I haven't nurtured that relationship. I haven't progressed in getting to know them and letting them know me a little bit more. And that's where the boundaries come in. I need to let them know me a little bit more. And at that point, you take active steps to say, hey, would you like to come into the house, basically? It gets very lonely if you are always keeping the door locked. So examine your motivations for not letting anyone in. I'm not going to share my feelings, my thoughts, my space with anybody. People just aren't safe. Just me and my dog. That's all we need. We want to help people examine why. What is it that they fear about other people? What experiences have they had that led them to develop those fears of other people? And how could they develop healthy relationships with other people eventually, and use what they've learned from past bad experiences to stay safe? There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack, and we don't want to push people into it. Helping them develop a relationship with themselves and silence all of those hecklers that are in their head and amplify the voices of the cheerleaders in their head can be a first step. If you let everyone in, first, you don't want to keep everyone out. But if you let everyone in, you may find that there's no room for you and some unsavory characters have entered. Likewise, for people who just share everything with everybody and it's just the door's wide open, have them examine their motivations for letting everyone in. Are they afraid of getting lonely? Are they afraid of abandonment or rejection if they set any boundaries? It's like, I really need to be loved. I really need support. So I'm not going to tell you no about anything because I'm afraid that you'll reject me, because that's been my prior experience. We want to examine fear of confrontation. In a lot of chaotic households, people who set boundaries got into conflict. Helping them recognize what they are afraid of and help them develop the skills to manage confrontation if it happens. Manage conflict if it happens. Recognizing that sometimes when we tell people no, their first response is why? Or their first response may be to push back. And helping them develop the assertiveness skills to say, it's not that I don't like you. It's not that I don't trust you. I just don't feel safe doing that right now. Or that's not something I feel comfortable sharing with you right now. And they may have a lot of guilt for saying no or disagreeing because they were punished for it or shamed for it when they were younger. Behaviors are communication, and behaviors are generally, there are a few things that are innate, but behaviors are generally learned. So we always need to look back at How did you learn this behavior? And what is it communicating? What function is it serving for you right now? Another law, you have the power to choose who to let in and when. You can have different boundaries for the same person in each piece of life, like I shared earlier. Not everybody has to know all your stuff. My children, when they were growing up, I didn't share with them some of my feelings and thoughts, and it wasn't appropriate. There was a boundary. There's a boundary of what's appropriate to share with a 6-year-old. However, they shared more with me, and that's okay because, there is that power dynamic though. Was I comfortable around them physically? Yeah, I had no boundaries with them physically. If they wanted to be held, they could be held. If they wanted to be across the room, that's fine too. Environmentally, we had boundaries. You don't go into mommy and daddy's room. That was a boundary we set. And generally when we set boundaries, we tried to express why. That's our private space, or it's not safe to do this, or it's, we would find an explanation for them more than because I said so. What happens when somebody tells you, you can't do that because I said so? For a lot of us, it makes us go, well, why not? What's that back there? It's almost like the Wizard of Oz with the guy behind the curtain. You start getting more curious. But in any event, a lot of times when we set boundaries, when we ask people to do something or not do something, if we give them a general rationale, it can help in communicating and help them understand why we're setting that boundary. You can refuse to rescue or enable immature or hurtful behaviors. You can choose to keep the door shut. Somebody comes to your house and they're acting the fool. You do not have to open that door. Somebody comes up to you at work, at home, whatever, and they're behaving immaturely or they're being hurtful. You don't have to let them in. You don't have to share your feelings. You don't have to let them stay in your physical presence. You can excuse yourself from the situation. You can set a boundary and say, I'm not going to stand here and tolerate this behavior. You can refuse to entertain discussions on hot button topics. Just keep the door shut. If you want to come over for coffee, you want to come into the house, that's fine. However, boundary, we're not going to discuss these topics. Would do that for my kids every time they went to their grandmother's house. You don't discuss politics, you don't discuss religion, and you don't discuss education. It was just guaranteed to become conflictual. So they didn't. And that kept things on a more even ground. Building trust can be tentative, and it's a good thing. I try to avoid using the word should. It can be tentative. If you think you can trust somebody, you give them a little bit and see how they handle it. And if they respond well, without getting upset, without violating your boundaries, without abandoning you, whatever, then you can try giving them a little bit more. And you develop trust that way. That's the whole thing in counseling with sharing and a little bit of reciprocal self-disclosure. You're helping the person feel more comfortable sharing something with you. Now, granted, in counseling, you're not going to share with your client as much as they're sharing with you by any stretch of the imagination. But it can be helpful when you're establishing this trust to lower your boundaries a little bit and maybe share, yeah, I had an experience with that when my mother was going through chemo. End of story. I'm not going to go into deep details because it's not my therapy session, not appropriate, but I may share something so we can connect on some level. If we feel after we've talked to somebody through the screen door, metaphorically speaking, if we've kind of tested the waters and it seems like that person is trustworthy, then we can let them in. We can start sharing more and becoming a little bit more vulnerable to them. And we can choose when we want to invite them in. And if they start violating our boundaries or we start feeling uncomfortable, we can also choose to ask them to leave. Cognitively, when we talk about cognitive boundaries, when I share what I think and my opinions about things with you, I can choose at a certain point, if it seems like it's not safe, I can choose to not share that with you anymore. If I'm talking to somebody about something and it seems to be making them very uncomfortable, or they seem to be getting very angry, then I may choose at that point to say, okay, this is not a safe thing. I'm going to set a boundary here and say, maybe this isn't something that we discuss. And that's okay. Just because somebody comes in to your house, just because you lower your boundaries with somebody, doesn't mean you have to let them stay. You are responsible for protecting the sanctity of your home and your headspace. When we let somebody stay, it can be physically they stay in our presence or they stay in our life, or it can be mentally. And even if we've told them, no, I don't want to spend time with you anymore, it's not safe, if we let them stay rent-free in our head and we hear their voice, we hear their criticisms, then they are still staying with us. We have the right to kick it to the curb. You are responsible to other people, but not for them. When somebody is in a relationship with you, you let them come in, you share information with them. I'm responsible to other people to be honest and trustworthy and blah, blah, blah. But I'm not responsible for what they do for what they do. And if they choose inappropriate behaviors, then I have the right to strengthen my boundaries so I can stay safe. And you cannot change other people. You can provide your wisdom or perspective, but it's up to them to decide what to do with it. They can take what's useful and leave the rest. I use this phrase, I've used it for decades, and I think it's really important. If I am providing education or what I perceive as insight, I'll say, well, my perspective on this is blah, blah, blah. Take what's useful and leave the rest, because they may disagree with me, and that's okay. That's my way of saying agree to disagree without using that phrase, because that's a trigger phrase for me. We need to remember to respect other people's boundaries. Not even if we see what they're doing is potentially harmful, not where we've got to make a report or something, but it looks like they're getting ready to make what we perceive as a mistake. We have to respect people's boundaries. I remember very clearly this one person was getting ready to get out of residential treatment and had made the decision to move in to be roommates with two other people from treatment. They were all getting out of a 28-day program. They were brand spanking new in treatment, and they were all going to be rooming together. Research will tell you, experience will tell you that that's probably a really bad idea unless you're in a sober living home where there's a house manager or something. But three people, brand new in recovery, just getting out of residential, probably not a great idea. I shared my concerns with that person. They heard them, but they chose to do it anyway. And that's okay. They're adults. They have the right to make their own choices. And it was up to me to respect their boundaries and allow them to do what they were going to choose to do and believe what they were going to choose to believe, because they believed that the three of them could help each other maintain sobriety, and that would prevent them from, all of them, from relapsing. And I can kind of see that fallacy where you're trying to keep each other pulled up, but as soon as one person starts to fall, they may pull the other two down with them. And that's unfortunately what did happen. But I told that person my perspective and what I had frequently seen happen before, provided them the information. They took what was useful, which was none of it, and left it on the table. And that's okay. I wasn't offended. I was sad, but I had to respect their choices. If you want people to respect your boundaries, you must respect their boundaries. So be proactive. Communicate your boundaries and don't expect mind reading because different people have different boundaries. What I think is perfectly fine, you may think is intrusive, or you may think is too standoffish. It's important to communicate boundaries. If I give somebody a key to my house to feed my cat and water my plants, I'm going to tell them, feed my cat, water my plants, please stay out of, these rooms. And I expect that to be respected. Don't try to change people. We can change ourselves, and other people will or won't change how they respond to us. I cannot change whether somebody is going to hold on to anger, hold on to guilt. I can change how I respond to them, and they can change in response. If I say, I just can't tolerate all the negativity right now. I hear that you're angry and I hear that you're frustrated, and I am happy to be here for you if you want to talk about anything else but. However, I feel like we've reached an impasse on this particular issue. That's setting a boundary. It's saying, I'm here for you. I care about you. However, I'm not going to continue to steep myself in this problem with you. Remember the phrase, have the serenity to accept the things or people you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We can accept people for who they are. We can love people for who they are. It doesn't mean we have to like their behaviors. And when we set boundaries, we can still love and respect them in our hearts, but we can protect ourselves from their behaviors. Therapists need to be sensitive and recognize and respect clients' goals and beliefs, even if they differ from ours. And this is a common complaint I'm hearing lately, where therapists are engaged in relationships, therapeutic relationships with clients, and they find that they have vehemently different approaches or beliefs about something. Our goal is to help them move toward a rich and meaningful life as they define it. And when people do not see a problem with their beliefs or behaviors, but we do, it's okay to disagree. It's okay, if appropriate, to state our perspective, but it's not okay to insist they change. Examples, substance use or addictive behaviors. A lot of people don't ever want to quit. It's not for me to tell them that they have to be, they need to be, they should be clean and sober. It's for me to say, okay, it is your choice to continue to use. Now, let's look at what's important in your rich and meaningful life and how that helps or undermines your movement toward that. Their living situation, like I just shared, some people will choose to stay in or embark upon a dysfunctional living situation, and we can see it's a train wreck from a mile away, but it's not our life. And we are not seeing it through the same worldview, through the same experiences and perspectives that they are. Therefore, we can hear it. We can support them and help them problem solve as they go through it. Body image. When somebody says, oh, I'm obese, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm blah, whatever it is, what is one of the worst ways to respond? No, you're not. Well, that just invalidated their feelings. It's important when we're working with people with body image issues to respect their perspective. Research has actually shown that for some people with eating disorders and body dysmorphic disorder, they literally visually see themselves differently than what we see. When we look at them, when they look in the mirror, they see a shape that is distorted from what reality is. Anyhow, when we are working with people who need to forgive or have a lot of guilt and resentment, it's not our place to tell them when they need to forgive or how to forgive, or even that they have to forgive. It's up to us to help them figure out, is forgiveness something that I need to do so I can move toward my goals? When it comes to grief, masculinity, being in a polyamorous or a kink BDSM relationship, abortion, these are all very hot button issues. And when people start talking about them, they may feel very vulnerable. And it's really important that we respect the person and the person's worldview and assist them in figuring out how to move toward their richest and most meaningful life. We've talked about boundaries, and I refer a lot to boundaries as a house. Boundaries help you feel safe in your own house. And when I talk about your own house, I mean in your skin. I'm living in my own skin, and I need to set boundaries. You have the ability to choose who you let in, how long they stay, and if you let them live there rent-free, using all your electricity and eating all your food. People whose comments that you internalize are staying there. If they are critical, if they are harmful, if they are defeating in your head, that's kind of like they're living there rent-free. They're draining your energy. Now, some people, they'll move into your head and they're cheerleaders. They're actually contributing and powering that generator of motivation and forward movement. Great. Live in my head as long as you want. But we want to get rid of the ones that drain the energy. Thinking about different categories. Benign strangers. This is like the UPS man or the postman or, well, those are about the only people that come to our door. But these people you may talk to through the screen door to learn about what they're offering. They may have something you need now or in the future. Tree removal, landscapers. Somebody comes offering that. I'm not going to invite them in and say, hey, let's have coffee and talk about it. No, I'm going to be like, okay, leave your card on the door. And, if I need you, I'll reach out to you. Politicians, they actually do come around door to door here. Mentors, colleagues, and even just strangers you may run into. Maybe you're at a coffee shop and somebody strikes up a conversation with you. Okay, well, you're not going to start telling them your whole life story or where you live or whatever, or giving them a great big old hug. You just met them. You're going to set that boundary. And then and that's kind of like talking to them through the screen door, trying to suss them out, figure out, is this person potentially safe? And is this somebody that I might want to invite in? Burglars. These are the people like narcissists, sociopaths, and people in active addiction who will desperately try to figure out how to stealthily get in so they can rob you of your self-worth, confidence, and even your stuff. They may smile and charm to get in and then slowly change. I am the best thing that ever happened to you. And then over time, I quit doing things for you. I quit helping out. Matter of fact, I start becoming a drain. They may start gaslighting you. I didn't do that. It's not my fault that happened. You never told me that I was supposed to pick up the kids. Well, yes, I did. Showing up only when they need something. And then saying, if you cared about me, you would do this. Those are the burglars. They're there. They're draining. They always want something from you, and there's is not a give and take. In relationships, it's like a seesaw or a teeter-totter, whatever they call it where you're from. There's a give and take. When one person is in crisis, the other person may be giving a lot, but then it balances back out. And when the other person needs help, then the energy goes both ways. Burglars, they're always taking, they're always draining. They're always trying to figure out, what can you do for me? Children, and I don't necessarily mean people under the age of 18. I mean people that act like children. These are people are immature, or they may have problems such as borderline personality. They insist on getting their own way and that you will approve of them at all times. Otherwise, they will hurl flaming bags of dog poop at your door and go around the house knocking on every door and window until you finally give in and let them in. These children are the ones that throw the tantrum. You have the burglars, they're stealthy. Children, they're going to throw an absolute fit until they get their own way. And family and friends. These are people who show up at your door and are generally safe to let in. And when I say family, I mean family as you define it. Not every blood relative is safe. You may have a lot of blood relatives that fall into that burglar and child category. But your family, the people that you trust, the people that are supportive, people that you call friends, these are the people who show up at your door and are generally safe to let in. They won't rob you blind or intentionally cause you harm. You may have disagreements, but they respect that this is your house, your rules. If they don't respect your rules and you ask them to leave, they leave. Or they change their behavior, one or the other. But they don't insist on staying in your house, staying in your life, and forcing you to change. They're respectful of your person, your place, your thoughts, your feelings. So what do we do to stay safe? Well, lock the doors. And I know this metaphor gets a little confusing sometimes, but just thinking about it, when you are interacting with others, generally you start out, if you've never met somebody, you're locking the door and you're only going to talk to them through a locked screen door until you figure out if they're safe or if they've got bad intentions. When you go to sleep at night, you lock your windows, you lock your doors. Why? Because you want to keep unsavory characters from getting in, or in our case, the bats from flying in. Use the peephole to know who is out there. Look, listen, get a sense of who's out there before you try to open the door and let people in. Periodically evaluate your boundaries to see if they're helping you or holding you back. A lot of times we talk about boundaries as being too weak, but it's important, crucial even, to remember that some people have boundaries that are just too daggum rigid and they won't change. They won't listen to anybody else. They won't respect other people's opinions. It's just my way or the highway constantly. How's that working for you? Communicate your boundaries. And I know we've talked about all of these so far, kind of summarizing. And remember, you have the power to choose who you let in and give your energy, love, and stuff to. Who stays in your house, and if you change your rules or beliefs. We are going to generally lower or soften our boundaries for people as we begin to trust them. But some people, we may not. Or we may change our boundaries, change our rules about determining who is safe based on a recent experience. That's okay. We can start setting those rules. We have the right to change our rules, what we need to do. The boundary workout, told you we'd get here. Make a list of 5 to 10 types of situations in which you regularly have difficulty assertively maintaining boundaries. For example, a friend asks you to do something and you really don't have the time or you feel like they take advantage. How do you assert your boundaries with that person? Do you say, oh, well, I don't want to make them mad, so I'll do it anyway? Or do you say, screw you, you never help me, why should I help you? Opposite sides of the spectrum. Or do you do something in between? Someone expects you to change your point of view. They may say something like, well, only an idiot would think that blah, blah, blah. Or they expect you to change something you do. You're not doing it right. You should do it this way. If you hear the word should, it's a good indication that someone is violating your boundaries. How do you respond to that? People will assert different points of view. If they state it assertively, this is my belief, that's very different than saying, well, only an idiot would think what you think. That's aggressive. That's attacking. How do you respond if someone acts in an aggressive or an attacking manner? If somebody says only an idiot would have that belief, and it happens to be the belief I hold, I might first address the fact that that's probably not a very nice thing to say, and there may be reasons somebody holds that belief. Another example, you continue to dwell on something someone said. So how do you set that boundary in your own head? You're setting that boundary between what they said that you keep replaying over and over again and what you want to be thinking about. You disagree with someone about something and demand change. Well, that's clearly violating boundaries unless you're assertively stating, I have a problem with you continuing to use substances or you continuing to drink alcohol. And I love you and I would like to spend time with you, but you cannot stay here unless you're clean and sober. So you're setting a boundary that says, this is what I need to do to stay safe. I'm not telling you that you have to do it. End of story. I'm saying if you want to come in the house, if you want to spend time together, then you have to change your behavior, but you have a choice. If a coworker goes through your desk to get stuff or just to be nosy, how do you handle that? How do you set that boundary? You're upset and someone tells you to suck it up or get over it. That's obviously invalidating your feelings and potentially violating boundaries. How do you respond in a way that helps you feel empowered to have your feelings, to have your thoughts? Or someone regularly wants to give you a hug. How do you set a boundary with that person? And it could be a client, it could be a child, heck, it could be your dog. My dog gets up on my lap all the time, but I don't always want him on my lap. So sometimes I have to push him down. I have to set that boundary and go, no, boo, mom's too hot right now. Gotta love menopause. Anyhow, identify an interaction when one of these things has happened that we just went through, whether it's something that happened in the past or you envision it happening in the future, and practice responding to it in a way that maintains your boundaries. Create and review your boundary bill of rights each morning. This is another activity you can do in group or even an individual. An example of a boundary bill of rights, and you can add your own things, take out what you want. I have the right to only be touched when I want. I have the right to express my uniqueness as long as it doesn't infringe on someone else's boundaries. My daughter went through a phase when she was younger where she was dressing very creatively. It was not inappropriate, and it just was stuff that I probably wouldn't wear out in public. But she loved it. And that was her right to express herself as she felt comfortable. She had the right to express her uniqueness, including the headband with the little kitty ears on it. I have the right to my thoughts and feelings. I have the right to choose when I change my thoughts and feelings. I don't have to be angry all the time. I don't have to continue to be angry about something. I can choose to let it go. Or maybe I change my point of view. I change my perspective. Sometimes it's called growth. I have the right to be heard as long as I communicate assertively and not aggressively. And I have the right to privacy in my stuff. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other rights if you want to go through each type of boundary, but this can be a very empowering activity. I love doing it in group because we create a group boundary bill of rights and we can talk about different things. We learn boundaries through our interactions with primary caregivers and the people in our cultures, and the cultures plural. We have different cultures. There is my work culture. There is my family culture. There is my culture of people that do animal rescue. Lots of different cultures. And we learn boundaries through those interactions. Unfortunately, sometimes those boundaries are not healthy. There are many types of boundaries, and each person's boundaries are a bit different. It's important to explore and increase your awareness of what healthy boundaries look like for you, and to inquire of others what their boundaries are. Not just wait for them to tell you or assume you know, but ask them, do you mind if I give you a hug? Or is it okay if I blah, blah, blah? Those are things that can help people develop trust, enhance rapport, and feel safe in relationships.